Much like Joe Rogan, I think Jordan Peterson is one of the most intentionally misrepresented people on the planet, and this debate versus 20 atheists is absolutely no different. From people intentionally arguing in bad faith, to people purposefully mischaracterizing or strawmanning his position, or even just outright insulting him, we're going to get into all of it. This will be about Jordan's second claim in the Jubilee debate. If you want to watch my video reviewing the first claim, make sure to click right up here. With nothing further, I'm going to let the man introduce himself and get right into the video.
Hello there, I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists. My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
What is up, Mr. Canada?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever. Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals, and older individuals found in a tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth, still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right? But we know that members of his tribe were taking care of him, right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, we actually developed altruism.
So morality is intrinsic.
I think
So it precedes science.
that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right,
Yeah.
require some level of morality or...
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regards to science. Thank you very much. That science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
How's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just indicated.
Now, purpose is obviously a gimme. The scientific method is not going to tell us as human beings what our purpose in life is, unless you consider reproduction a purpose, which every living being would have the exact same purpose, just procreate and continue the species. Morality, however, is a little bit different. If we are going to use Brian's example of the Neanderthals as an example of morality, then it actually plays directly into Peterson's argument, because the Neanderthals obviously very much predate science and the scientific method, so obviously they were not able to develop their morality from use of the scientific method. That being said, I don't know if I necessarily count this as morality per se, and the reason is because there are actually many different social animals that will protect and help injured members of the tribe or of the pack. Wolves are actually a very good example of this.
So
No, science doesn't explain morality.
it doesn't explain how social animals would need to be...
Well, that's
altruistic?
a complicated question.
Is it? But we see it, though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Okay, so you're asking, why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're social animals and we
Yeah,
need
but there's
to be...
more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique. And that structures our morality.
No, actually, there are other animals that can predict the future. Or
Not
predict
really.
the future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed somebody. And so
Hunting
actually...
animals.
No. Kids threw shit at the tiger. The tiger actually plotted its escape, and it found the kids.
I'm not saying that animals can't think.
Now, Brian makes a claim here that helping injured members of the pack or of the tribe is an altruistic act. I actually don't think that that's necessarily the case. Again, wolves and other social creatures are using this exact same method, and the reason they're using it is actually because it's a biological advantage for the entire pack. The more members of the pack there are, the greater in strength the pack is. And it's also much easier, especially in humans, which have a very long development cycle before we're actually capable of doing a lot of things. It's easier to take care of an injured member of the pack than it is to wait the amount of time it would take for a new member to actually be viable as a replacement. Now, there are very much forms of altruism today that mimic this stuff. For instance, somebody volunteering their time at an elderly care facility where they're not actually getting anything other than maybe the good feeling that they did something right for the day. But this very early form of Neanderthal, essentially pack tactic, is definitely not out of selfless concern. This is very much a self-interest thing. The pack is stronger if there are more members of the pack, even if somebody is injured. And if we're claiming that wolves are moral for having a strong social structure, then I think we're missing the plot a little bit on what morality exactly is. Brian also makes the claim here that there are other animals, such as tigers, that can track the future as well as humans can, and that's simply just not the case. Yes, animals can plan things like a hunt. Lions, for example, are very good at planning their hunts so that they can be maximally effective at taking down their prey. And there are animals like ravens that can recognize faces and recognize the features of other ravens even years after being separated. But this is very much different than being able to track the future as an abstract concept. The closest example of an animal planning for the future is a squirrel caching food away for later use, but this is not something that is thought of or pre-planned. This is actually an instinctual response, and other animals that exhibit similar behaviors are doing it out of a conscious reaction to the environment, not something that is actually thought out and planned in the same way that humans do. Overall, I think the main problem with this argument is that we are not defining what morality is correctly. I don't think that pack tactics like wolves and other social animals do can be considered morality.
Jordan Peterson, how you doing?
How you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes, exactly. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori.
Okay.
Right? That's why we define science as value-free.
Mm-hmm.
But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
Okay.
And that act of prioritization of attention is a value-predicated act.
So number one off the bat, I already like this guy for at least letting Peterson get out his entire thought uninterrupted. And I think Peterson hits this spot on. Science is the realm of the physical world and how we can use it and manipulate it and measure it. Philosophy and religion are the realms of morality and purpose in life. Part of Peterson's point is also that science has to exist within a moral framework. And the evidence for that is that scientists have to judge from a moral perspective what things that they should be prioritizing when it comes to determining the field of their scientific research. And the way that the scientists go about their research is also subject to a moral interpretation and value structure. An example of this is the fact that we could learn a lot about the human body by simply testing things directly on the human body. But we have deemed as a society that that is inhumane to do. It's not humane to subject the human body to experimental things. We instead test a lot of this stuff on animals first, which we have, by our own definition, deemed lesser beings, which again is another moral judgment that we've made. And we protect ourselves through this use of using animals first. And this might just be my personal opinion, but I feel that if science was the determiner of morality, then the more moral thing to do would be to directly test everything on humans, because that would give us the fastest and most accurate assessment of what things would do. So for instance, if we had a theoretical cure for cancer, the best thing to do from a scientific standpoint would be to instantly start testing that drug on humans as fast as we possibly can so that we can see if the cure works as soon as possible. But because science does not exist on its own moral framework, it exists on an outside moral framework, we've deemed that inhumane.
So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery is wrong, I think
Now,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's immoral.
that's why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave?
Again, I appreciate Luke for letting Peterson make his full point before continuing, but slavery being in the Bible is a red herring fallacy in this particular argument, where the argument is that morality does not derive from science. Humans' flawed interpretation or implementation of morality from the Bible has nothing to do with this point. And yes, you can consider the evolution of morality over time as a cultural evolution, but this is not a scientific evolution.
Where do you think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the idea of God.
Fine, but what's your point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans, regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences as humans, which is what is best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be, which conscience is also something that has evolved over time. And I think that's something that does evolve in morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, this is moral because God says so, just like women's suffrage.
There's lots
and just like homosexuality.
All human societies were slave owning. So you can't blame that on the Bible.
And what Peterson just said rings very true. All of the things that people like to blame on old interpretations of the Bible, like slavery, the oppression of women, all of this very much predates the Bible or Christianity as a concept. So you can't blame the Bible or Christianity for these problems. And in fact, a lot of the reason that this stuff doesn't exist around the globe anymore is because of the progression of Judeo-Christian ideas. But again, all of this is a red herring fallacy. It has nothing to do with the fact that morality cannot be derived from science. This is all just a critique of Christianity as a concept. All in all, I thought Luke was very respectful. I just wish that he had actually stayed on topic.
Dr. Peterson?
Good to see you, man.
Pleasure.
What's your name?
Brian, if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting. Because I would say, by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a definition, right?
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell?
Yes, that's a good way of thinking about it.
What is the purpose of heaven? Do you understand? So here's the deal.
At
we
minimum,
can get
it's
into
the
an
opposite
infinite
of endless suffering. How about that?
And so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? And if we can achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth without God, avoiding it, if we can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim?
Well, yeah, except that it doesn't. You circumvented my initial definition, because I said that by definition, God was the unified source of morality.
And again, we're going to run into this issue where the definition of God that Peterson uses is vastly different from the definition that most people use for God. Most people view God as this single, supernatural, omnipresent, omniscient being that has an effect on people's lives. That is not and has never been the definition that Peterson uses for God. And again, we have to get our definition straight before we can have the conversation. The definition of God that Peterson uses is the conscience, the collective unity where all moral conversations are based around. God is the ultimate moral good. He is the conscience. He is what tells us what is and is not a morally correct action.
When you're talking about morality, though, when you really reverse engineer it and you get it down to its root, you're a psychologist, it really seems like it just has to deal with motivation. People are saying there is a God,
It's more specific than that.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if there is a God and there is a moral code and it doesn't come at your benefit, are you going to follow it?
It depends on how you define your benefit. If
it's going to come at your expense, would you still follow it? If God came down and said, here is my moral code and you should follow it, but even if you follow it, you are still going to end up in hell, are you going to follow it?
Well, that was the question that was put to Job and to Christ, right? Because they were required. Hang on, I'm answering your question. They were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with the motivation of believing that this omnipotent, all-loving God would somehow turn it into a benefit. So they still did it solely for their benefit.
And I think the main problem I have with Brian's point here is that his point is that Christ and Job did this solely for their own benefit and not to anybody else's benefit. There's no altruism in this. And if you can read the story of Christ and think that he did this only for his benefit, I think you have either had a massive misunderstanding of the story of Christ or you haven't actually read it. And that's coming from somebody who is an agnostic. And another underlying problem that Peterson will address in a moment is, what do we mean exactly by your benefit?
So
no,
when you,
not, well,
yes,
let's
they
define,
did. Yes,
hang
they
on,
did.
Hang on. Let's define benefit. Like, if I did something for your sister, would that be to your benefit? Like, how are you defining your benefit? Do you mean one of your whims gratified now? Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time?
And that's a debatable question. If you do something that you end up suffering for, but somebody else you know benefits from it, is that to your benefit? That's up to interpretation, I guess.
Among other things.
I'm actually a non-theist. I'm not an atheist. I believe the human condition is one of uncertainty. And what that means is that I don't believe that you can conclude there is a God with certainty, and I don't believe that you can conclude that there is a God without in the same position. Now, with that, I don't care. I still wake up every day, and I have motivation to be a moral person.
Define moral.
Moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you come to that conclusion?
And what I ought to do, ultimately it comes down to what not just benefits me, but what benefits the entire planet, what benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective comes from linear thinking. And when you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved moved or an uncaused cause, he was defining God from a linear perspective, and you do the same with morality, and you do the same with purpose.
How does my definition of morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself, and nothing in the universe exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists in and of itself. It's a whole systems-based morality. It's a systems-based reality.
Is there a hierarchical structure?
And that is what the quantum.
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
Are some things, I think some things lead to more benefits than others.
Then, by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay.
What is pause there? You've been voted out by the majority.
I do take a little bit of issue with Brian saying that Christianity and morality derived from Christianity or other religions is a linear view of morality. It's very much not. Christianity and other religions are a very holistic view on not just morality, but humans' interaction with morality. What's best for you is not necessarily the moral option. It has to be what's best for you today, tomorrow, the week after, the month after, etc. But it also has to be best for your community. That also has to be what's best for society. Then that has to be what's best for the world. And then eventually that boils down to what has to be best for the entire universe. It's a very holistic view of morality. And as Peterson points out, his morality and Brian's morality, even though Brian is a non-theist, are fundamentally the same thing. They're both what's best for me, what's best for my community, what's best for society, what's best for the world, what's best for the universe. The same morality. Brian is just claiming to get this from a non-theistic perspective. And then as soon as Jordan tries to start laying out the foundation to challenge that claim, unfortunately, Brian gets voted off. Now, having seen Peterson argue this a lot of times, it probably would have gone something like, well, you have to have a hierarchical view of what morality actually is. Some things have to be better than others. How do you figure that out? Well, eventually it boils down to, well, my conscience tells me what is best. And as Peterson has already said multiple times, God is the conscience. So eventually, when it gets down to it, all morality does derive from God based on the definition of God that Peterson uses. Overall, I think Brian was a very good debater. He had some good points, and if he was ever in Texas, I'd buy him a beer.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an all-knowing.
How about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He was a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
So I will tell you right now, I absolutely hate Parker, and that will become apparent later in the video as to why. That being said, he is correct here. Peterson does not believe in the same God that most Christians do, which is the omniscient, omnipresent being. Peterson believes in conscience as a God, as he mentioned Cardinal Newman put forth in the Catholic religion back in the 1800s.
So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say you
circular?
believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a belief?
believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Now, Peterson's always been known for his cataclysmic style of talking, but I think he has a point here. If you're not willing to give up your life for what you believe in, can you really say that you actually believe in it? For instance, I believe that everybody has a right to free speech, and yes, I would defend everybody's right to free speech, even if that included my own death, because I truly believe in that concept. Now, this doesn't mean you have to literally give up your life. For instance, journalists that believe in integrity and keeping their sources private have gone to prison and served time over this type of thing. And there's plenty of people around the world that are doing similar things for causes that they believe in. It's not a matter of literally giving up your life, but it is the sense that you are willing to lose everything that you hold dear to hold true to what you believe in.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't
life.
be so sure.
And this is why I don't like Parker, because him and people like him have a tendency to caricature and make fun of somebody's position rather than actually trying to address it. They would rather get the very clickbait meme version of the argument for views rather than actually seriously debating the topic.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany.
Why is it always Nazi Germany and the Jewish question every time somebody says that they would not lie? Again, we're caricaturing and making fun of somebody's position rather than seriously debating the topic.
I would have done everything I bloody well could so I wouldn't be in that situation to begin with. It's a hypothetical and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you eat
don't
today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just asking if you ate it today.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Good on Jordan for calling him out for screwing around and playing games instead of, actually seriously having a debate. And when he gets called out, he plays innocent. What do you mean I'm playing a game just for asking a hypothetical? Sorry, I'll try and tone down my hatred for Parker.
Are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
Why
anti-fascist?
are you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying.
It's like the more he talks, the more you can tell that he is only here to get some clickbait on Jordan Peterson.
We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really want to be associated with Christianity.
I can imagine that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage.
Okay,
but that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you lied in that scenario. So
not
clearly,
without the context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it. You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a corner.
How is it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Now, there's two fundamental problems with this line of thinking, especially as it relates to the point of the discussion. One, there's literally no discussion here about any morality coming from science. This is just another attack on the religious standard rather than actually providing evidence that morality or purpose comes from science. There was actually surprisingly little of that across any of the debates on this particular claim. The only person who actually tried to prove the claim that morality can come from science was the first Brian, even though he did not do a very good job of it. Everybody else was just trying to disprove the claim that morality has to come from religion, which was not the actual prompt. It does not logically follow that if morality does not come from religion, that it has to be found or can be found within science. Again, I wish we had stayed a little more on prompt with this claim, but the Jubilee videos all seem to have this fundamental problem that there's not a lot of discussion about the actual claims insofar as the claims themselves can be answered. And the second problem is this is just a reskinned version of the trolley problem, except instead of one person and 5 people, it's your beliefs versus the actual people. Are you willing to let your beliefs die in order to save these other people? And I like the way that Peterson answered it. It's, I would do the least amount of lying possible in that scenario, because up to that point, I had already made so many mistakes that the only thing I can do is something wrong. At the end of the day, when all you can make are wrong decisions, the only option is to choose the least wrong decision. But hey, I'm just some white guy. What do I know? And that was my overview of Jordan Peterson's second claim of the Jubilee debate, that morality and purpose cannot be found within science. If you appreciated the video and thought I got everything right, make sure to give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video or you thought I got something wrong, give me a thumbs down and let me know what I got wrong in the comments. I hope you guys appreciated the video. I'll see you in the next one.